We've got the trade data for Mexico to U.S. and U.S. to Mexico. And one of the stylized facts that we start to see is that there's some of the same types of goods going back and forth. And that's one of the things that future trade theories try to figure out from Ricardo. In Ricardo's case, we had a nice simple thing. I do the cars, you do the food, and we trade, right? But what we find is that there's a lot of trade going on of people in the same industry. We have American DVD players and Asian or Japanese DVD players. They're buying our DVD players and we're buying their DVD players. And so there's a lot of that type of activity that economists try to explain. And so that's part of what we're seeing here, the start of with some of this data between Mexico and the United States. All right, so this is a review from where we left off last time, thinking about the product cycle. Again, economists are trying to explain the patterns of trade that we started to see. So why do we have manufacturing stuff going on in other countries? Is it because the labor's cheap, which seems to be some sort of knee-jerk reaction, or is there something else going on? And some of that's explained with our economies of scale and our taste for goods. Since we're the high-income country, we can afford to buy lots of stuff. Some stuff we need, some stuff we just want, right? And so our consumption tends to be high, and we see the production of those goods start to be shifted away from our country. So it highlights the product cycle in production and consumption over time for high income versus the low income countries. All right, so here's the two of them together. It kind of helps put the pieces together for this product cycle theory. And again, it's not really doing a lot in terms of predicting things, but just observing what goes on. And at some point here, there's a flip where we've got more production than consumption going on in the poor countries. They can't afford to buy it as easily, but they're able to produce it. So that's the concept here for the product cycle. Questions or comments there? All right, Chinese. We like Chinese stuff, apparently. All look like common stuff that we're used to with the Made in China sticker on there. Toys with lead-based paint on them, right? We got the toys coming across. Now, an interesting thing that I might have told some of you in some different classes is the Chinese, one of our larger exports to them, in other words, a Chinese import, is chopsticks, which I think is kind of interesting. So the Chinese import chopsticks, so we give them their utensils to eat that we don't even really use, they end up buying from us, which I thought was kind of an interesting fact with China.
Is that just because they don't have very much wood?
They don't have a comparative advantage in it, I know that, right? So they probably got lots of wood, but that doesn't mean they got a comparative advantage in it. They might be able to use their labor for all of the other stuff that we've got going on. And maybe, are any of you in the management class at 8 a.m. Tuesday, Thursday? None of you guys are right now. We just did the Louisville Slugger video. So Louisville Slugger is making the baseball bats, and so maybe they got leftover wood. We can just do. We got little chopsticks. We got big baseball bats. Kind of just do one and the same and keep them going. I don't know. All right. So, foreign trade versus foreign investment. So, foreign investment falls into this category of direct foreign investment. What are you picking up here? Give me it in a nutshell of what you know or what you think, in addition to what's read, what's on the screen here.
It's kind of like getting it from yourself rather than getting it from another country, except you're kind of following into the country's regulations.
Okay, so that's one thing. So that's where I was going to go next. What would cause you to want to do that? So this is kind of perplexed economists. Like, why not just buy it from another company that's there? Why would you want to open up a plant?
Control.
Control in what way? I'd agree.
Have control over how much gets made, how much you can put back into your country.
Okay. And quantity in production, right? So if it's an important part of your production process, having control over making sure you get enough of it, if it's an important part, and hopefully there's other competitors, so it might have something to do with the number of companies that can provide that particular thing. But a lot of companies are picky about the quality of the input that goes into their final production process, right? And so then you get into the specifications, and if I'm working with 5 companies, that's much more difficult to do than working with maybe 1 company. And if I have control of that company, or if that company's really mine, then I have even greater control. So I think control is a driving force. What else? What else does that bring to the table? And it might be related to control too, but...
It'd be cheaper.
Okay.
Because you wouldn't necessarily have any trade costs involved. Maybe
Okay.
not as much.
Now, okay, so if we're talking trade costs, though, are you talking about transportation costs or trade costs with our final consumer, or sounds like she's not even in spatial economics. I'm kind of hearing this little spatial thing going. Okay, so is that what you're thinking, or what did you mean by trade costs?
More like just trade barriers and
Okay.
tariffs and stuff like that. You wouldn't have to worry about that as much.
Yeah, so if you go commit to putting yourself in a country, maybe the government that's there sees that you're making a commitment with them, and they'll be a little more friendlier, right, in terms of the policies as well. And then
You still have base with your home country too, because you are an American based.
with your identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Other comments on that? I think the thing that I was thinking about with the labor was, or with the control part, was maybe your labor. That might be a little bit easier to do, and the quality of labor as it relates, having a little more control over that, maybe even the conditions that they're in. So, so just remember foreign investment. This is going to come back in when we get into the later chapters, that foreign investment is actually moving your operations there, right? So you're actually a direct foreign investment, and sometimes you'll get tax credits. When I was in Vietnam, it was not fighting Vietnam, I'm not that old, number one, but I visited Vietnam, and I got to stay at a Vietnamese guy's house who had a factory there that did contracts with like Baby Dior, Christian Dior, and other places. So I've got some pictures I'll share with you at a different time, but just this huge factory, and his house was there, and we stayed at his house that was on the piece of land where the factory was. And he was a Vietnamese citizen back prior to the Vietnam War, and when the Vietnam War hit, he fled to France, became a citizen of France, so now he's a Frenchman. Vietnam fixes their stuff and gets a little bit better on the world scene. He comes back to Vietnam, opens up a factory, but now he's a direct foreign investment because he's a foreigner opening up a plant in Vietnam. And then he was open to tax credits and other favorable treatment to the factory because he was an outsider coming in, even though he was really an insider who left and then came back. So we can start to, our governments have come up with policies to try to attract foreign investment to come into their country to help them out and build some trade. All right. So take a look at these stats. When we did macroeconomics and we said cigarettes, that GDP was equal to C, consumption, plus investment, plus government expenditures, plus net exports. Exports minus imports. Something we didn't get into was this, that it can be one firm importing back to the other, which is not easy to untangle in the statistics of how much that's going on. So while it might sound easy, oh, well, this firm's doing this, we don't keep track of that type of data at that micro of a level. And so these were just estimates of what was going on in the 90s. A third of the merchandise exports and 2/5 of the merchandise imports were intra-firm. So all just firms locating overseas, direct foreign investment. I sell it to them, they do something with it, I buy it back from them. And so it's just really the creation of a global production process. But the accounting of that isn't very easy at the macro level, and so it just shows up as an export or an import, and they try to estimate how much of that goes on.
Company in the U.S.
Yeah, so it's like
same company in it's a bitter split.
Yeah, so it's like a foreign subsidiary,
Right.
but it's an independent company, but it's related, so that all the profits are going ultimately to the same pool.
Right.
But I'm selling to them, they're selling to us. All right, so that led, those types of questions gave rise to, I think his name was Dunning's OLI theory. And this one's not so much a trade theory. So we've been looking at theories of international trade and what causes countries to trade, comparative advantage, hexaline, all that stuff. This one is what causes a company to either locate overseas or just find a company to buy from and import overseas. So are we trading or are we creating a new company? And so this is what this theory boils down to, is the ownership, location, and internalization for these reasons. So what goes into that location? What are some of the considerations? Kind of talked about them a little bit already.
Availability of resources.
Availability of resources, good. What type of company, let's drill that down a little deeper. So what would cause you to relocate there if there was a special kind of resource, maybe?
Like cheaper labor.
Okay, lesser expensive labor might be one thing. What's part of the reason that drove this guy to come up with this theory is that he found that a lot of the relocation didn't go on in developing countries. So cheap labor is kind of the scapegoat that we use often. What are the other considerations at a micro level, at the firm level? Labor's cheap, that's great, but what would cause me to not go there, even if the labor's cheap?
Foreign policy, investment.
Okay, that's one, good one. What else? Think at the micro level. You are a firm producing something. I guess maybe let's stick to a manufacturing example. You're in the production of, pick a good, any good, give me a good. Gene, first thing that comes to mind. What?
Cars.
Cars, okay, so you're in car production. You like cheap labor, but
Input prices, pretty good.
okay, so other contributing factors. So if labor, what would labor need to be as a fraction of your car to make cheap labor really attractive to you?
A lot.
A lot, right? So if labor was a large fraction of your bill, so if you got a $32,000 car and $28,000 of it was labor, then cheap labor sounds pretty attractive. But if labor's only $5,000 of the $32,000 car, labor's just kind of, it's an issue, but it's not the most pressing issue, right? So that's part of the reasoning going in. Okay, good. What else about our car plant that might be important? So imagine just going, wherever the labor's cheapest, I'm going to go. Go. What's wrong with the decision I just made? Potentially. What else is missing out of that? We got the government, John mentioned.
Yeah, your capital.
Okay, like what?
Like,
Your stuff that you can't pick up a building and move it, so you could lose your economies of scale maybe or something.
Okay, could be. Yeah. If capital's important.
your infrastructure is important. Like, you can't just pick up an using back to the example, you can't pick up an electrical network and get it over to a certain country to have power there.
Okay, I like your infrastructure, and I think what you said is good, but not the infrastructure I was thinking about. What else might you need if you're manufacturing cars at some plant that would cause you to not just say, oh, labor's the cheapest in this middle part of Africa, the government's good, let's hold that constant. Let me plunk down there in the middle of Africa. Real cheap labor, I can get people for pennies an hour.
Your comparative advantage where you are? Or competitive?
Yeah, and that's what we're kind of drilling down a little bit deeper. I liked infrastructure. I see what you were thinking, your internal infrastructure. What else might be a problem with locating right in the middle of the Sahara Desert because labor's cheap right there? Roads, yeah, just the infrastructure that actually gets you to and from the plant. That's been a major barrier for some places going into developing countries, right? So you might have cheap labor in Africa. In fact, Africa as a nation would probably have the cheapest labor overall, but companies aren't relocating to Africa. So they're going to China and India and other places where if your production, again, it all depends on at the micro level, what your process is all about. But if you have a big ticket item like a car, that's a weight gaining activity. Those of you who are in spatial, if we're putting together resources and making something heavy and we need to relocate that, we need air travel, we need roads, we need bridges, we need whatever. Transportation costs might be a pretty important issue. And so it's more than just cheap labor that's needed. Okay, other comments or questions there? Offshoring, outsourcing. Which one gives more grief?
Outsourcing.
Outsourcing?
Yeah.
Why do you say that?
Because you're taking people or resources that you have right here and where you live and giving their importance to someone who doesn't even contribute to your immediate
Okay,
business necessarily.
to things that's close to you. All right, everybody agree with that? Or other comments?
I'd say offshoring,
Why do you say that?
because you're taking, basically, you're taking my job and sending it to insert nation here.
Okay, so a little more tension with job taking, right? It's got that kind of spin because you're You're definitely going outside the home country with offshoring.
Yeah, but you can still hire people where you work to work for your company, as opposed to outsourcing the jobs that are gone, right?
Possibly. Yep. Yeah, it's not an easy answer. That's why I kind of threw it out there, just to see what you guys thought about it. Other comments?
Which one's more difficult?
Yeah, which one causes more grief, I guess, for us as a nation? And most people would probably not know the difference between these two, right? That's why we're in class here, because we're thinking about these issues a little more tighter. They might equate both of those things, but as we read the definitions, what do you think causes more grief?
I would say offshoring.
Offshoring? Going outside?
Just because then you have to, like with outsourcing, you already have a company in mind that knows what they're doing and they have all the laws under control.
So yeah, based on this definition, it's just the reassignment of activities to another firm. That firm could still be inside the home country.
That's right. So one thing here with outsourcing, it gets done all the time. I mean, we at Ottawa University outsource a number of activities that we could do in-house. If we've hired an advertising agency to run some program. We have some internal marketing people that are our own employees, but then we also have a company that we contract with tightly, but all the profits, whatever they charge us, they handle their own business. We've outsourced it.
The general understanding of outsourcing, when people, like the general public will hear outsourcing, they're like, oh, the jobs are getting sent over to China, but technically that's offshoring.
Right.
But I mean, outsourcing does happen outside of the country, then it is kind of what Max said, offshoring means you can't still hire within. Outsourcing, it's the other country's problem now, you're just basically corporate, getting whatever we're trying to get from them. From in-house and getting it now brought over to you.
What do you think about outsourcing with Sodexo? Is that okay?
Haven't been a fan of it so far.
Yeah, I've had stomach issues.
Well, the reason I like to bring that one up is I found an interesting story. I heard something that Sodexo is one of the world's largest employers. The world's largest employers. Like right up there in the top 5 or something. I don't remember what the ranking was.
Nobody told me today that their headquarters are in France. Is what she
Yeah, that's where I was going with that, is that you have to dig hard. There's nothing, you won't find it real easy, but Sodexo originated as a French company. So by us hiring or using Sodexo here at OU, we're really using French type business here, which is kind of weird. So the lines are getting so blurred now that we don't really know if we're outsourcing, are we really going outside or inside, until you start doing a little more homework. And I kind of hope that maybe within my lifetime, we just won't give a rip. We'll just kind of have the global playground, and it'll be the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, will be the World Free Trade Agreement. All the trade zones will be gone. There won't be any barriers to trade, and we'll just be able to imagine all the people, that sort of thing, right? That's what I would hope, that we might get to. I don't think it'll be all Star Trek action with single currency and all of that within my lifetime, but I think eventually we'll get there. There's been pretty great strides even in the last 50 to 60 years, and what's driving it, what's the beauty of what's driving it, in my opinion, is profit. Profit helps us overcome our biases, our racism, our, oh, that's them, and we have to protect Americans. Profits are kind of an awesome equalizer, right? I mean, it's like, oh, you mean I can make money over in India? If I just open up a little plant there and I get to know the Indian people and I realize that they're just human beings too, and then I start moving over to Indonesia and then over to Africa, and oh wow, we're all just human beings on this little spinning thing. Maybe we should have a free trade agreement. That would make life a lot easier. And profits are going to be, the competition and profits are going to be the thing that bring down barriers, I think, around the world much faster than any other social mechanism out there. I think the market mechanism will be the thing that brings down those barriers.
We need international
They can be. That's why we got to be careful to have policies that we don't have too exclusive of groups in bed with each other, calling the shots and trying to centrally plan themselves, right? We need to really let freedom ring. If we have freedom throughout the world, I think a lot of good things will happen. Just to give you a small example, since none of you were in there, and I might have told you the story, you guys are familiar with Jackie Robinson, right? So an economist did a little journal article and said, who brought down the race barriers in baseball, Jackie Robinson or Adam Smith? And what he argued was that Adam Smith, in the form of competition and free markets, brought down the race barrier just as much as Jackie Robinson did, because there was owners and managers, and what did those owners and managers want to do when they're in professional baseball? What's their main goal? What's their objective? Make money. And how do we make money? What puts butts in seats?
Star players.
Star players, potentially, and what's that?
Steroids.
Steroids. Maybe. It's not exactly what I was looking for. But when do we start to see more and more fans going to games? Whether and there's always stars out there, but what do teams need to be doing? Winning, right? And how do you win games? How do you win games? You put the best people on the field that you can. So here we had a group of people with oodles more talent than the least of some other people, and it was just this disproportionate thing. And they said, I got a guy who can win me some games, put butts in the seats, make money, right? Let's make this happen. And of course, not to discount the courage and bravery that Jackie Robinson did coming in, because that was a two-way street. But there was real economic forces at play at the same time to bring down that race wall that was in professional baseball. So anyway, I think that was kind of a neat story. It wasn't my story. That was what this guy. That is what this guy wrote about. So, but my point is with that's kind of similar to what happens, I think, in business around the world, is that we start to figure out that we need to put the best people in the best spots under whatever the situations are, and I can overcome my biases potentially if there's enough money to attract me to it. John, or that helps me overcome it.
Kind of going back to Max's comment on the one giant central government thing, I'm not entirely sure you would have to add that. Just kind of basing off of the operations of the European Union. I don't know if they do have like a council or whatever, but each individual nation still keeps their own government to a certain point. I mean, they all kind of work as countries themselves. That's why you see Germany bailing out Greece, for example.
Yeah. Depending on how tight they are, they can run into problems with how they spend their money if they're not. But you're right, there can be rules of engagement, kind of similar to what we do with companies in the United States, right? We have the rule of law of you can't take other people's property, and all of those can be harmonized to some degree around the world as they benefit free trade and not benefit special interests. But in terms of engaging trade and protecting freedom, I think it's very possible to have a set of rules, not necessarily one government. So I agree with you that you wouldn't have to have one government to do that.
And you might in the end need like one, or at least a series of banking systems, I think. But with the IMF in place and some other things, you have the basic framework of that. Obviously, some extra work would need to be done to have one world currency, one world everything. But
yeah,
there's framework there.
So, and not only would I not think that it would go to one government, I wouldn't want it to go to one government, because locations, again, if we start to blur the lines on where locations are, places are different, and so they might need to be run different. We got different people in different places and different climates and different circumstances, and so having more localized governments cooperating with each other is probably a better model than one big one planning at all. Okay? But I think Max's point is good in that if we're not careful, there's people out there that'll say, well, you know, it'd be much more efficient if we just had one government and we could all contribute our thoughts together. We could kumbaya by the fire and.
Well, I mean, you could do that at like a United Nations Council type thing.
If everything's homogenous, it just barks that to me. It just says that there's a few people could, I don't know. I guess if it's all free, it wouldn't be.
Yeah, if there's we need the right checks and balances, right?
Countries pretty much rule the world. I mean, that's the reason why the United Nations Security Council has by far the most power of those 5 nations.
All right, so here's a few more little tidbits. So one company can have multiple combinations of that, of course, right? We got one foreign affiliate, and we've got trade that's going on, and we've outsourced internally, we've outsourced externally. So don't forget that. It's not a single choice of I'm doing this or I'm doing this, but rather a combination of that stuff. Another interesting data point. Globalization is, just huge and growing, but this data says something a little bit different. So the share of multinational activity outside the United States has not changed dramatically since 1977. So what do these mean here? So value added by the foreign production, 25, 26. That's a long span of time for that not to change very much, right? Percentage-wise. Now, is there anything alarming about that? Or anything, statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics type of thing? What is there anything potentially daunting with that?
That 6% share of employment is going to, because of the large number of each percentage being, is going to be used to malicious intent to change people's viewpoints. They're going to use that as a number of million workers.
Now hold on, let me just back up on what you're saying here. This part?
Yeah.
So percent to total workers at multinational firms. 22% worked at multinational firms, 28%. So that was the 6. You're talking about the 6% increase?
I thought that was offshore. I read that wrong. My bad.
Okay. So that's not too, it's grown.
Feels like we're trying to hold on to what's ours instead of maybe not. I don't know. I guess that's showing that it's growing, so we wouldn't be doing that.
So share of multinational activity outside the United States. So not too big in terms of those numbers. So what does the share of multinational activity, what does that mean? The share of multinational activity outside the United States. So U.S. multinational corporations, what does that mean?
They operate in multiple countries, not in the United States, but their home base is the U.S.
But their home base is the U.S. So we got U.S. citizens, started corporations, and now they're multinational. Now they're in different places. All right. Has GDP changed between 1977 and 2003 for the United States? Yeah, I don't know what it is either. But and I don't have any quick resource here to look at what it is. But I do know it's about $15 trillion now, right? So we got about $15 trillion in 2012. So if I was to guess, let's say we're 5 trillion into 10 trillion. My point is just to think about the level of economic activity has grown dramatically over this time. Right? The fraction of that is being done by multinational corporations, though, hasn't changed. Okay. All right. Yes, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
it's just percentages.
Right.
Like, that's not something that you go right off. You press up the table.
What it doesn't say is how many more multinational companies there are. All right, we don't have numbers of that, which I think would be kind of interesting to see if the number of multinational companies has stayed about the same. What would that mean? I'm not saying it has, but I just want to push your brains a little bit. If the number of companies, if there was 10,000 companies in 1977 and there's a little over 10,000 companies in 2003, what would that mean? Uh-oh.
That was me.
You got Siri bouncing around in here?
Siri got a question for you.
Lately.
What do you think? GDP's gone double. The fraction of multinational share has stayed about the same.
So it's increased proportionally the same with GDP. So
And what does that say about the control of multinational companies? Has it gone up or down?
it hasn't really changed.
If the number of companies went from 10,000 to just a little over 10,000?
Yeah, but their shares still the same.
Yeah, but their production increased dramatically.
Right.
I understand they increased dramatically, but so is everything else. So if you're looking at it and seeing,
So we've got companies that are a lot bigger or a little bit bigger.
Laughing.
So in terms of competition, we have more competition in terms of absolute numbers or less?
Less.
Less. A more concentration of power or less?
More.
A more concentration of power. So that's something that might be interesting to look at here, that the share has stayed about the same. Have they been, if the numbers haven't changed very much, have they been able to kind of insulate themselves, some of the big players, you know, look for protection, look for kickbacks? I don't know. That's kind of an interesting little side topic to keep in mind. All right. So, 3 primary factors. So give me an example of one of these things relating to the United States.
The recession via supply push.
Okay. In what respect?
Um,
What were you thinking?
well, it wasn't.
So
Businesses
forces
work.
inside a nation that cause people to think about leaving. So I'm with you. That's inside.
Businesses do not have the incentive to invest within our soil,
Okay.
so they maybe.
All right. Other examples.
Disasters.
Natural disasters. Okay, good one.
Hasn't freedom of religion always been a demand pull factor?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Freedom of religion. Yes, because people have fled countries due to religious persecution. That's an interesting one. So that could be one pulling you in. Good.
or just freedoms in general, freedom, or
The United States freedoms that we have in general.
government restrictions, whether they happen in a certain industry or not, depending upon what you're in.
Okay.
You have to have protectionism for yourself in one industry that might pull you if you're looking to get into that industry, which you don't want to do.
Okay. Good. What about the social networks part here?
People like to be near their families, so
Okay. And so the ability to do that kind of changed, I think, an early dynamic of in the United States. When you go to Manhattan and you can visit Chinatown, right? And you've got the Irish district, and you've got the Jewish district, and you've got, so, which kind of ties into the freedoms, so it makes it a little bit easier, the ability to kind of flock together into networks could be an important historical factor. But if you're thinking about going to open up a business in Syria, you know, would you think twice about that, maybe, if you're an American? Yeah, might not be the best place. But as, let's say that Syria is successful in getting their stuff together here, maybe as it slowly starts to grow, the ability of people to congregate from other countries in certain areas, if it's whether it's Christian areas, because that happens in like Africa and other places too. So that can be a factor on migration and trade. Okay. I'm not sure I totally agree with this bullet. What do you think? In the medium and long run, trade has very little effect on the number of jobs. So in the short run, trade may reduce the number of jobs in industry, increase jobs in competitive industries. I think we hopefully all agree on that. Long run.
Trade with that within like another country, then you're not doing as much of that in your home country.
Yes, so they're thinking, I think the statement is thinking within, let's say, the United States or a particular country. Trade has very little effect on the number of jobs.
I mean, I would say I agree with you that within a country it's going to affect it, but if you look like in like all over the world within trade, the amount of jobs isn't going to be affected.
In what respect? What you mean? Oh, you mean globally?
Yeah.
Well, I just kind of keep thinking about the unemployed when I think about that. Even longer term unemployment. You know, I have mixed feelings about this bullet. I mean, what do you think supports the argument here? The abundance or scarcity of jobs is a function of labor market policies, incentives to work, and government macroeconomic policies. So government policies.
In the long run, it all fluctuates and equals out. So there's not ever, you don't ever realize, like, there's no economic profit in the long run. How could there be an economic gain in labor or jobs, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Who's ambiguous?
There's always market opportunities for people to get involved and get a job one way or another. Depending on their incentives and everything else that's been structured in the second bullet. The fact that things have moved over one way or another is not a factor, just because at that point, in the quote unquote long run, workers have had the ability to be retrained in whatever happens to be acceptable in the market at that point. So they will be able to create themselves, or they will be able to find a new job at that point.
Okay.
I think that's what the bullet's trying to say. I mean, the
So
reality of
trades,
that
trade.
statement-
So basically, trades they shift around, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so we go from a declining sector to an emerging sector. So the number of jobs. But what we've also learned is that there's gains from trade. So that there should be a few more jobs in the emerging sector overall. If there's a net gain from trade, then there's likely to be a few more jobs. This is hard to measure, by the way. Really hard to measure, because if you're going, one of the rubs with some things is that if we move into capital intensive type jobs, there's fewer people. And so the number of jobs might be a little bit different. So, I mean, I don't totally disagree with it, but, and then at the same time, as if what might affect the number of jobs is the amount of freedom, which might mean instead of government policies of control, but more of a hands-off approach, right? Their choice to freedom allows more trade creates more jobs. So what created the jobs? The government policy of lowering barriers or the trade that it created? That was kind of my mixed feelings with it, is that I think it's ultimately the trade that's there, but yet we do have to have policies in place that allow that trade to occur. All right, that is it. Chapter 4 is in the books.